Hello everybody and welcome to OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. I'm Jack and today we're going to be taking a look at the Paradise Dragona set. Me and Joe realised we haven't actually done a first impressions on this set yet, so we wanted to get one over to you. There's going to be another video tomorrow with the first impressions of the Sylveon, Cerulege and the Supercharged Breaker cards that we've already got, but today we're going to be looking at Paradise Dragona. So this set has been out for a couple of weeks now in Japan. It's a dragon-themed set, as you'll see from the variety of different dragons we've got. And it's going to make up part of our Surging Sparks set, which is out at the start of November. So not too long to wait for this one already. We're actually already starting to think of decks and booking some dates to do some early IRL testing for this set already. So cool to see these cards in action. So we're going to start with the trainers as usual, and the first is an A spec. Energy Search Pro lets you search your deck for any number of basic energy of different types. So this is the kind of A spec that you're going to see in maybe decks like Goldengo and such. I don't actually think this is quite strong enough as an A spec. I think the effect is really cool, but I think we have much stronger A specs out there, and I think its uses are pretty limited. Again, it's only going to be decks like Goldengo, which want to have a lot of energy for certain reasons. In their hand, and we already have things like Letter of Encouragement anyway, which whilst you do have to be behind or you do have to have suffered a knockout to do so, we that's a pretty good way of searching energy anyway. So I don't think it's really strong enough as an ace spec overall. Next up we have Helper Bell. Helper Bell is a trainer card that you can only use if you're second and on your first turn, so I think VIP pass, but only effective in 50% of the games. It does let you search for a supporter and put it into your hand, which is a very strong effect. This is a really interesting one. I don't think this is going to see play. I think we've got a similar card in format right now. I think it's called Order Box or something, which you end your turn, but lets you search out for some specific cards. These kinds of effects that have very strong search effects with very limited use, typically don't see too much play. VIP Pass was like the big exception, but that could be used first and second. And I think just the fact that 50% of the time you're not going to be able to use this is actually going to probably hold this card back. Also, a lot of the ways of searching items we have right now are through the use of supporters, i.e. Irida and Arven and such. So a lot of the time you're going to use a supporter to search for this, or you will be looking to use supporters to search for specific items on the first turn of the game anyway. So that means you wouldn't then get the benefit of the supporter card, and then your opponent can Iono it away or anything like that. So yeah, I don't think it's too much of a too impactful compared to, like, obviously we've been stung in the past by these kinds of very powerful effects that have very limited use, things like VIP Pass, but I really don't think this one is going to see too much play either. Next up we have Dusk Ball, which is a reprint from, I think, the Diamond and Pearl era was the last time we saw this card, which essentially is Great Ball for the bottom of your deck rather than the top. It's effectively a better Great Ball for decks or when you get Iono and stuff like that, but I don't think we have too many major synergies with putting cards onto the bottom of the deck right now. There are a couple of interesting cards like the Kofu and stuff, but realistically, Great Ball is only seen in a very small amount of decks, ones that really do desire a lot more ball search. This is, again, effectively a similar effect to a Great Ball, so maybe it's interchangeable and maybe slightly better in a format with a lot of Iono, but realistically I think these cards are both pretty interchangeable, and again, Great Ball is not seeing a huge amount of play anyway. Next up we have Disruptive Letter. Your opponent counts how many cards they have in their hand, shuffles them and put them to the bottom of their deck, then your opponent draws that many cards. So yeah, a bit of an interesting combo breaker card. Again, because this is only a -1 on your side, I don't even think control decks are ever going to be that interested in playing this. This doesn't make them draw more cards to try and deck them out. It doesn't reduce the amount of cards they have in hand to try and stop them from having a combo or anything like that. So because this is like a net neutral amount of cards on their perspective, I don't think control decks really have a reason to play this other than trying to, I guess, disrupt combos. But again, we have better ways of disrupting combos. We have things like Area, we have things like Misfortune Sisters. So I think there's much stronger cards out there. I don't really see a home for this too much, other than, like I say, stopping these combo-based things like rare candies and stuff. But even so, there's no reason to believe you wouldn't, I guess, get them back into the combo or just discard the card with Area or whatever. So yeah, again, another one that I don't think has too much application overall. Next up we have Megaton Blower, which is another A spec. You discard all Pokemon tools and all special energy attached to each of your opponent's Pokemon, and you may discard a stadium in play. So this basically just wipes out your opponent's board of any special energy and tool cards, which is pretty strong against decks like Lugia. I think there are a couple of other techs that you can maybe play to improve your Lugia matchup anyway. I don't think dedicating your ace spec to Lugia is particularly worth it. This does get rid of other tools and stuff as well, but I don't think tools aren't in a place at the moment where there's lots of them down to like prevent you getting knocked out and stuff. There's a couple of things like bravery charms and stuff in decks, but whilst we still have vacuum, that still feels like more an appropriate use. Similarly for stadiums, the stadium war is really big right now, but because of that, a lot of decks just play 4 stadiums, so just discarding a stadium isn't all that powerful. So again, it's another effect that's very powerful against Lugia, but I don't think it's as strong of a card in many other matchups, and because of that, it's not worth your race spec spot, especially whilst we also have E-Hammer and Lost Vacuum in format, which kind of do similar effects, or good enough. Usually you're targeting like a very specific special energy or tool card, so you're able to just like single out that specific one. I guess this is good at dealing with like double mist or double gift against Lugia, but again, such a niche case, it's very unlikely to come up, I think. Next up we have Dragon's Potion. This is a simple one, just heals 60 damage from your active dragon Pokemon. Regidrago is obviously very strong right now, similarly Raging Bolt is, but we are in a format where there's a lot of one-hit knockouts, so I don't think you're going to get too much value out of this. I think you'd really need to see a archetype that looks to wall with Dragon-type Pokemon for this to be likely to be good. We did see things like Great Potion be okay in the tag team era, as like a one-of in some of these quad decks, like Quad Guardi Sylveon and stuff sometimes played a one-of Great Potion, but I think there was a lot less one-shot back then. Those like quad decks typically look to try and be like massive walls essentially, and right now we have a lot of decks that can just try and deal a huge amount of damage and basically knock out whatever you have. And similarly, there's a couple of dragon types in this set, but I don't think any of them are like crazy impactful. So I don't think there's enough reason to play these in the combo based Regidrago deck and the the very like hyper aggressive Raging Bolt deck. This just isn't the type of card you'd want to play. We have Pasho Berry, which is a tool similar to the other berries we've seen so far that reduces the damage from your opponent's water type Pokemon by 60. The other two haven't seen any play. Similarly, I don't think this one will see any play. You have to be in a format where like 30+% of your matchups are one type for this to be relevant, I think. And we're pretty far away from that right now. Next up, we have Counter Gain. This is a reprint from the Sun and Moon era, I want to say. It says if you have more prize cards remaining than your opponent, the attacks of the Pokemon this card is attached to cost 1 colorless less. Very powerful effect, to be honest. I suspect this will see a lot of play in a lot of different decks due to it being searchable by Arven. There's plenty of Arven-based decks right now. Admittedly, a couple of these are things like Charizard and Dragapult, which have no colorless in their energy cost anyway. But any deck that tries to build around Arven could potentially be using this. So it's definitely one to keep in mind. There has been some success in Japan with like a quad Buffalant controlling style deck. You've got the new Buffalant, which has the curly wall, which reduces the amount of damage you take, and then the old Buffalant, which lost zones energy. You can do that with a double turbo and a counter gain, which has seen some success. So I think that will probably naturally sort of translate its way over here as well. But yeah, I suspect this card will, be splashed as a one-of in a variety of Arven decks. Like I say, I don't think the main ones like Charizard and Dragapult will be using them, but any deck that looks to use the Arven engine can definitely splash this in if they have some kind of colorless in their attack cost. There's nothing that jumps out to me right now. There's actually a lot of the format that uses no colorless in their attack. You've got things like Palkia, you've got things like Raging Bolt, Regidrago, Charizard, Dragapult. All of these don't use any colorless in their attack cost, so you're really not going to be able to get much use out of Counter Gain. But maybe things like Terrapagos could use it. You could use Terrapagos with like Jet Energy or some basic energy to be able to then play some other attackers and things like that. Obviously, Terrapagos' damage is capped at 220 with the double turbo, so maybe you do the sort of classic Terrapagos thing where you start with a single prize board, they take one prize, you go behind on prizes, and then you essentially try and race them taking 2 prize KOs, but instead you use counter gain and some other types of energy, maybe jet energy or mist energy or gift energy, stuff like that instead. So that could be a play. That could be an interesting use for the card. But yeah, I think it will be impactful. I don't think it's going to be crazy good. It wasn't crazy good back in the Zoroark era. It was just good. It was very powerful. It let you do some pretty cool things, but it was never like a 4 of index or anything. So I'm not expecting it to be overly played, but I think it will see play here and there and like splashed in, and will hopefully create some cool highlight reel moments too. Next up we have Drayton's, the first supporter card. Lets you look at the top 7 of your deck, and you can reveal a Pokemon and a trainer you find there, and shuffle put them into your hand, shuffle the other cards back into your deck. Not terrible, but again, not great, I don't think. We have decent ways of searching right now, and I don't think we need one of these kind of, I guess, RNG style cards where you Great Ball, you're essentially Great Ball or whatever to try and find some key pieces. There are a couple of decks that have played things like Hassle and stuff. Some of the Lost Zone decks have teched in a Hassle, but again, these effects are very rarely seen in high counts, and I don't think this one's quite strong enough to overtake things like Research and stuff like that. Next up we have Surfer, which lets you switch your active Pokemon with one of your bench Pokemon. Then if you do, you can draw cards until you have 5 in your hand. I like seeing these switch plus effect style like supporters, because I think it makes them inherently just better. You can play this as a, similarly to how Kieran was played, as a non-item based switching effect. You could play this as a non-item based switching effect. Admittedly, the draw until 5 isn't strong enough, so I think Kieran is still probably the better one, even though you have to pick that effect, and you don't get the other effect. This one you do get both, but I don't think it's quite strong enough. But it could be interesting, again, if Control is at a point where they're basically able to, your deck needs ways of switching without like having it in item-based format. You could use this, but I think Kieran is slightly better, just because draw until you have 5 isn't really strong enough. Next up we have Drasna. Shuffle your hand into your deck and then flip a coin. If heads, draw 8. If tails, draw 3. This is never going to see any play. This is way too risky. These flip effects rarely see play. There was one format where we had a flip which was 4 and 7, so this is basically higher risk, higher reward. That Professor Birch's observations did see play, but it was in a format where there were exactly like 3 draw supporters. It was Research and then Shauna and Observations, and it was basically a debate whether you played Shauna or Observations. I was always on the Shauna side rather than the Observations side. This is probably better because the upside is better, and we have lots of onboard draw right now, so it's less bad if you only draw 3. But again, this card is never going to see play. I don't think it's not strong enough. Lysia's Appeal is a really strong card though. Switch one of your opponent's benched basic Pokemon to the active spot, and the new active spot is now confused. So this actually could be a competitor for boss in some decks. I could see this maybe making its way over like the 3rd boss that decks sometimes play, similar to how Serena sometimes did. Again, I think there'll definitely be decks that just play boss. I think that's fine, but there will be matchups where you're able to boss up a basic Pokemon and try and stall them out by also confusing them. Admittedly, a lot of the time, if you're bossing for stalling players, there's going to be better targets than a basic Pokemon, or like the confusion isn't going to matter and stuff like that. But it could be an interesting one that people decide to put into the deck as like their 3rd gusting option. There'll definitely still be decks. There's plenty of evolution decks right now, so it may need to wait until there's a format where there's a few more basic decks. But we do have things like Miraidon, Terapagos, Raging Bolt, all of these decks, Roaring Moon as well, all of these decks are all basic focused, and maybe the confusion can help you out here and there. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see some people playing this card. I think a lot of decks will just stick with the 3 boss just purely from being able to gust up evolutions. That's still really important, dealing with things like Pidgeot and stuff. But I could see some decks, maybe if they naturally play a high boss count, maybe even only the decks that play 4 boss would maybe trade the 4th boss for this Lysia's Appeal. A lot of the time, decks will look to like finish the game by knocking out a Luminion or a Rotom or something like that. So there is definitely still uses for this. I'm not sold that it's going to be in everything, but I think some people could end up trying it out as like their final gusting option in the same way that Serena was sometimes played. Admittedly, I think Serena is also better because it also functioned as a draw card too. But I could see this like squeaking into the final gusting card if decks so choose. And the final A spec is Rich Energy. This says as long as you attach this card to a Pokemon, it's a colorless energy, and when you attach it, you draw 4 cards. This is a really interesting one. Obviously, because you have to attach it from hand, this isn't going to be overtaking anything like the Legacy Energy in Lugia, but if there are any decks that are able to sort of tank and heal and pick up like the Rich Energy over and over again, that could be really powerful. Obviously, taking up your Ace Spec spot is a big deal, but that like the just getting a free draw 4 is very powerful. This in combination with like maybe this could be an energy that the Terapagos plays in combination with counter gain, so you're able to attach this Rich Energy, draw 4, counter gain, attack, and then maybe try and take a hit with like double Buffalant or something, pick it up and Rich Energy again. So yeah, could be an interesting one. There is an interesting slacking that I'll talk about in tomorrow's video that could see play with this Rich Energy. I think there's probably going to be better ace specs for the deck, but could see play with the Rich Energy. You can, again, like slacking is just a big tanky Pokemon that you can try and tank a hit from, pick it up with Sharon's Care or Churro or anything like that. I guess Churro wouldn't work, but yeah, pick it up with Sharon's Care, try and then reuse the Rich Energy and draw more cards. So yeah, again, gonna have pretty niche uses. I'm not blown away by it, but I think in some tanking archetypes, it could potentially be powerful. So onto the Pokemon then. We're going to start. I'm going to rush through a lot of these because there's not actually. I think the trainers are pretty cool in this set. They're not great, but there's some quite interesting effects. I think the Pokemon are pretty lackluster though, to be honest. We've got an Execute that lets you evolve into an Exeggutor if you go first on your first turn, which is at least decent because it has 30 HP. The rest of the grass types are pretty weak. The Jungle Whip doesn't quite do enough to knock out a Charizard, but with some kind of damage manipulation, it would. Shiinotic lets you put your opponent's active Pokemon to sleep, but again, not really too powerful. Gouging Fire is quite an interesting one. Blazing Support lets you do 170 for 3 if your opponent has 4 of your prize cards remaining. That's pretty powerful. I don't think Fire decks, Fire decks already have a good one prizer, but I don't think there's like many Fire decks other than Charizard. I don't think Fire decks necessarily need this right now, but like Gouging Fire is an archetype that could maybe use another one prizer if you wanted to go for like a full one prize board. 170 for 3 is like pretty powerful, so yeah, worth keeping in mind potentially. Black Kyurem has the Ice Age attack that paralyzes your opponent's Dragon type Pokemon if it's if their active Pokemon is a Dragon type, it paralyzes it. The only notable, I don't think this is all that strong. I think we have lots of ways of switching right now, and again, I think you need a lot of the meta to be one type, to be Dragon type for this to be worth including into your deck. But that being said, this is completely colorless, which is why I think it's worth the shout out, just because it means that like this can be splashed into anything, right? So yeah, one to keep in mind. I don't actually think it's going to see too much play, because again, I think the format has to be very, very focused on Dragon types for you to get a lot of value out of a card like this. But, even so, worth keeping in mind just from it being completely colourless. Next up, we have Quaquavel. Quaquavel has a really interesting ability. Up Tempo lets you put a card from your hand to the bottom of your deck and then draw until you have 5 cards in hand. That's not bad. Again, I think these Stage 2s really need to have like broken effects for them to actually see play. Quaquavel's an interesting one. The Stage 2 EX isn't like terrible, but it's just not Charizard levels, so it's never really seen any play. But this is at least having a draw engine is decent with it. Titan, I don't know anything really about GLC, but Titan seems like it could be good in GLC. 180 and minus 30, doing 150. Yeah, that seems good. I'm really not familiar with the GLC format too much, but seems like good stats for the cost. The best card so far is Latias EX with the Skyline ability that says your basic Pokemon have no retreat. I think this is going to be pretty much a gimme for a lot of the basic centric decks, things like Miraidon, things like Raging Bolt. I can definitely see these just naturally playing one Latias and then being able to reduce their switch count, which is quite nice. I don't think Roaring Moon will play it because it already has Petulant, and Petulant works as an attacker. But I think some of the other ones will. Again, I don't think it's crazy strong. I think it's just a nice one-off to have that might end up sort of cheating you a space because you no longer need to play like 3 or 4 switch card or whatever you decide to play in your basic heavy deck. You can just get away with playing a Latias. I think probably typically the ones which have access to Area 0 are more likely to play it as well. We have a lot of Pokemon that we want on the board right now. I guess, actually, we have Mew EX, which is in a lot of these decks anyway, which means they already have free retreat. So you're probably going to want a Mew down before this regardless. So this only helps when your opponent is trying to stall you out of the game. So again, maybe in those situations, switch cards are better anyway. But this is like on board. Like this would be on board, so they can't do that. So yeah, I could see this maybe seeing play. Maybe it's slightly worse than I first thought in those decks. I can definitely see it making its way into those decks sometimes though. But they like I say, they all play Mew anyway, so it's kind of hard to justify this over like searching for this over Mew, given that Mew also draws cards. But maybe just for the space cheating perspective, maybe this sees play. Again, similarly in in Miraidon and Raging Bolt, you technically can play Area 0 Under Depths in both of those, so you're more likely to be able to have space for this on your board. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see whether decks adopt this. It's probably going to be one of these cards which some people play, some people don't, and it's never like truly right or wrong to play it either way. It's just like some people will prefer playing with it, and some people will prefer playing the switch cards because they prefer the bench space. But yeah, it feels like it's never really going to be wrong to see it in a deck, I suppose. What's next? There's nothing too crazy other than for the rest of the psychic types. Trapinch is quite cool. It lets you search for 2 basic Pokemon, put them on your bench. It's only quite cool because it has a Flygon EX, which is it's okay. Unfortunately, the best part about it is kind of neutralized, but the Stormy Retreat attack is an interesting one for 130, and you can switch this Pokemon to your bench. Not bad. You can switch into like a Mimikyu or something, try and keep your Terra out of range of getting attacked. Then the Sonic Peridot attack does 100 damage to all of your opponent's Pokemon EX and Pokemon V. So initially, I thought this card was going to be really good, but then Joe reminded me that basically, the majority of our Pokemon right now, or EXs, have this text on here that says, as long as this Pokemon is on your bench, prevent all damage done to this by attacks, which means Sonic Peridot will sometimes do 100 damage to the active and nothing more, which is really sad because I feel like Flygon doesn't get enough love. But there will be there's plenty of other decks that aren't, or there's plenty of other EXs and Vs that aren't Terras, so it will get it will often hit multiple things. But overall, I think unfortunately this card is just not quite good enough because of this Terra text, which is quite funny. I'd actually completely forgotten about the Terra text to begin with, but yeah, it's just not good enough, which is a shame. Yeah, the basics in this set, I feel are really, or the Pokemon in this set, I feel are really quite poor. There's a couple of other interesting ones that we'll get to. This is the Clefairy I thought was quite interesting. It lets you discard draw. The Archaludon I think is probably my favorite. I've tested with this a little bit already. Lets you it's a 300 HP stage 1, which is very powerful. Alloy build lets you attach 2 basic metal energy from your discard pile to your metal Pokemon when you evolve it. Typically in Japan, this has been seen as like a quad Archaludon deck, basically trying to just cycle the Archaludons. You can pick them up with Churro or Churro, or I think it's just Churro, actually. Yeah, you can only pick them up with Churro. I guess you can pick them up with Super Scoop Up as well, or Scoop Up Cyclone, but typically it's just Churro. You discard the energy, but then you can bench or evolve the Archaludon again and reattach those energies. So yeah, really powerful deck. It felt quite fair in my early testing with it, but it just did, it felt like it was really keeping decks honest. It definitely put on a lot of pressure. You're able to present a 1 prize board state on the first turn of the game, which is really important for these 2 prize decks, because you go from like a purely 1 prize board state to then having 300 HP and not having a weakness, which makes it really difficult to knock out. So it can actually make your prize map for your opponent really really annoying. There's also a Duraludon in the previous set in Stellar Crown, which has like a rage style attack, which has 80 plus how many damage counters you already have on you. That was really powerful against decks that dealt 200. There were a couple of instances where like a Palkia or a Regidrago would deal 200, just because that was the best play, and you were able to then use the Relicanth to copy the Duraludon's attack and deal 280 for 3, which was really powerful. So yeah, I think the deck has a lot of like cool things it can do. Like I say, it does feel quite fair. So I don't know whether it will be like a serious top tier contender, but it definitely felt like it kept decks honest. It felt like it was able to quite consistently win the game like in 4 or 5 turns. Now there definitely are decks which can win the game in 3 or 4 turns right now, which is why, like I say, it feels a bit fair, and I don't know whether it will be super impactful. But I think it's definitely one to keep in mind and one to try out. We're definitely going to be trying some early Duraludon builds. There was also some interesting Duraludon builds that played, like the Ceruledge, which I'll talk about tomorrow, which does more damage based on the amount of energy in your discard pile. So early game, you would discard a load of energy with Ceruledge, and then late game, you could use Archaludon to get that energy back and try and Metal Defender and try and prevent your opponent from winning just by having 300 HP and not having a weakness, which was really powerful. So yeah, very interesting card. Cool to see it some success in Japan, and it'll be interesting to see whether it like translates all the way over here. Goldengo has a it could be a decent one of Goldengo in the Goldengo EX deck. Rich Strike lets you do 1 for 120. Again, I think it's probably unlikely to see too much play in that deck, but it could be an interesting option. Iron Crown's another interesting one. 40 plus 80 if your opponent has 3 or more benched Pokemon. 120 for 2 isn't bad. Again, anything that is weak to metal, like there's a huge amount of decks right now that are playing very wide bench. Like they all have very wide benches. So 2 for 120, and especially if you're able to knock out something like a Chien-Pao or whatever. Now I know Chien-Pao isn't like particularly strong right now, but anything like metal weak, this is going to be a pretty interesting tech. I could see this going into, if Lost Box ever makes a resurgence, it could be an interesting card for that kind of archetype. Alolan Egg is not quite the last EX. I think there's one more EX to talk about after Alolan Egg. 300 HP, another 300 HP stage 1. No weakness as well, so very similar to Archaludon in that respect. Has the Tropical Fever attack, which does 150 for 2, and you can choose any number of basic energy from your hand and attach them to your Pokemon in any way you like. Not bad for setting up multiple Pokemon. I guess you would probably want to set up like other Alolan Eggs to then try and, tank a hit with this one and heal and move away and stuff like that. And then Swinging Sphere for 3 energy, lets you flip a coin. If heads, you knock out your opponent's active basic Pokemon. If tails, you knock out one of your opponent's benched basic Pokemon. Realistically, this is way too risky of an attack. If your opponent has a non-basic Pokemon in the active, 50% of the time this is going to do nothing. Sometimes like this will just do nothing anyway because you'll want to be knocking out their active Pokemon and you'll have to knock out a benched Pokemon. You're not even always like guaranteed a knockout, which is quite annoying because you would like to think attaching this many energy you're guaranteed a knockout, but if your opponent only has evolution in Pokemon in play, you're not guaranteed. You can't get a knockout whatsoever. So yeah, really weak in terms of a Terra Pokemon. I think overall, I think the only way this card will see any play is some kind of Tropical Fever deck, but I don't think it's really strong enough to even do that. I think that's really the only thing you can lean into though. This is at least like a 300 HP stage 1 though, so you can use that Execute to evolve into it quite quickly, but yeah, I don't think it's really powerful enough to warrant building a whole deck around. Next up, we have a couple of, the only reason I'm really talking about the Palkia and Dialga is just because of how good the arts are. These Palkia and Dialga look incredible. Time Control lets you search for 2 cards and put them on top of your deck, which isn't terrible, but again, not really great. Palkia, I've seen some people talking about Palkia because of the Space Crush attack. You can do 40 times the number of each basic energy attached to this Pokemon. In Japan, a couple of people have been pairing it with the Alolan Egg. Basically, you would Energy Search Pro all of your energy into your hand. You would then Tropical Fever to attach a load of energy to Palkia, and then Space Crush for a load of energy, for a load of damage. But putting a load of energy onto a 130 HP Pokemon and then letting your opponent have a turn probably isn't going to result in anything too successful. It's probably just going to knock it out. So yeah, not too good overall. We have another Flapple and Applin. These could be potentially played in, I guess, a Hydrapple deck. Sour Spit lets you basically finish something off 20 times the number of damage counters on your opponent's active Pokemon. You can hit them for an amount and then just triple the damage, essentially. And Sweet Melt lets you stop your opponent from attacking next turn. Again, I don't think these are really strong enough to see play in the Hydrapple, deck that's already not really strong enough, but they could potentially see a splash of success in there, I suppose. Finally, Cyclizar EX has 210 HP as a basic Pokemon, has the Breakthrough attack, which is 130 and 32 on every opponent's bench Pokemon. That's not terrible, but again, it's not great. Comparing this to Terapagos, it's just a lot weaker than Terapagos overall. It does have the Zircon Road attack, which does 180 for 3, and you may draw 5 cards. That's pretty impressive, but again, I think that's a lot of energy cost. These energy types aren't... I guess you have Teal Mask Ogerpon for the grass type, but these energy types aren't particularly synergistic with one another, so I can't really see this seeing too much play. This feels just like a whole lot worse than Terapagos. Feels like Terapagos just does more damage, is a bit tankier, is a bit easier to use. So yeah, Cyclers are not quite going to make it overall. So yeah, I think this set is quite weak, but it's going to be paired with a lot of other powerful cards that I will discuss in tomorrow's video. We've got the Cerulege EX and the Sylveon EX decks, and we've got a whole host of early releases from the Supercharge Breaker deck as well, set as well. So yeah, plenty to look at tomorrow. I'm glad this set is being paired with some other cards, because otherwise I think it would be quite underwhelming. But yeah, regardless, thank you very much for watching. I've been Jack from OmniPoke, and I look forward to seeing you guys in another video tomorrow. Cheers, everyone.